The idea of human-centered thinking or human-centered strategy that center of gravity pioneered 2 decades ago and has evolved it since then is nothing but a vast collection of stories, of mini stories, of anecdotes, of factoids from among others. These are stories of people and their lives, of the founders of companies, of brands, of culture, our own personal journeys as well, and very often a beautiful intersection or an amalgamation of all of these. It is therefore something that we all feel proud and joyful to be a part of, and these are stories worth telling over and over again. I want to therefore start with a story which is more than a decade and a half old. It's a story that's very important to us, very dear to us, because from among others, it's a story that set into motion what we have come to regard or kind of practice as human-centered strategy, or in a broader sense, human-centered thinking today. Dilip, a colleague of mine, and I both are in Kerala, in a city called Cochin. Kerala is in the southern part of India. We are in Cochin as part of some work we're doing for one of India's largest decor brands, maybe one of the largest decor brands in the world as well. As part of that visit to Cochin, we meet up with a whole host of architects and consumers and so on. And as a continuation to the journey, we're supposed to kind of go to Trivandrum the next day. The local manager from the company who's accompanying us on this journey, at some point in time, starts to set us up for this journey to Trivandrum, talking of this really unique and interesting home that he wants us to kind of travel to and see and meet the homeowner as well. So right through the journey, he's giving us small snippets or interesting stories or teasers on what we are hoping to see or what you're planning to see once you reach Trivandrum. Of course, we indulge him right through the journey, and the journey towards Trivandrum starts. It's a 4.5 hour road trip, and it's Kerala. It's beautiful, it's pristine green. There are fields of paddy and coconut any which way you look around. And post a 4.5 hour journey, we finally land in Trivandrum. We go through the various winding roads. We finally hit a cul-de-sac, take a left to this beautiful, wondrous house that this guy was setting us up for. And right in the middle of these pristine green fields, we see this bizarrely outlandish, maybe even garish at the time I felt, sunrise orange colored house, almost like a flaming orange color. We drive down to the gate. Dilip and I get out of the car, and we meet the owner. His name is Shaji. He comes and meets us at the gate. We exchange our pleasantries. And to set the conversation going, I tell him, interesting house, because I can't tell the truth, that would be rude. I can't tell a lie, because that would show up on my face. And he tells back, or he responds back, saying, Unna arachchu nikkinam. I want people to stop dead in their tracks. At that point in time, I really can't make much sense of his answer, and in my mind I'm saying, whatever, and we walk into the house. We walk into the house, and the house is absolutely lavish and opulent. It is like it's like Miss Havisham's house on steroids, of course a more contemporary version of it. There are massive upholstered furniture, there are huge Baroque-ish kind of artifacts, there are these massive drapes that kind of hang down from ceilings that are fairly high and so on. And in my heart, there's a small aesthetic condescension that's starting to build. It's not that I have any great claim to aesthetics, but nevertheless, I'm thinking in my mind, okay, what is this going on? Because there seems to be apparently no great resonance between the owner, in this case Shaji, and what his house appeared to me. There seemed to be kind of a fracture between the person and the house that he had put together. So we go on this tour of the house, and we see the showroom kitchen. Just to tell what that is, in Kerala there's something called as a showroom kitchen, which is people build kitchens to show it off to the world, and actually no work happens in the kitchen. The work always happens in a work kitchen, which is somewhere behind. So we go through this journey of the showroom kitchen, his bedrooms, and they're all equally opulent and lavish. And we go to the bathrooms, there's a sauna and a jacuzzi, but there's also a plastic bucket with a plastic mug in it. The aesthetic, I wouldn't call condescension, that's too strong a word, but I'm just starting to feel this discord between the person and the house. And I'm just thinking, okay, whatever. And we finally come to the balcony. In the balcony, there are two painters sitting and mixing paints. And Shaji introduces me and Dilip to the painter. His name is Radhakrishnan. And again, we exchange some pleasantries, and the guy, during the course of the conversation, tells us jokingly, kind of with a laugh, saying that if anyone in the vicinity of that house were to know that he's painting a house with such outlandish colors, he wouldn't get any job in that part of town. Anyway, we kind of laugh it off as a small joke, and we walk to the side we walk to the other side of the balcony, and there kind of settle down, and I asked Shahji the question, Shahji, tell me something about your life. And for the next hour and a half, Shahji tells me this beautiful story of how he, arguably in a more secular, maybe a more egalitarian place like Kerala, goes through the pressures of caste, of religion, of community, of lower socioeconomic status, and how he's the subject of the barbs of neighbors and so on and so forth. And his father, of course, is somebody who works in the crime branch, if I recall right. And they're not too well off. They're just able to make ends meet, just about able to make ends meet. And Shahji kind of studies up to his 10th standard. And when it looks like he's no longer interested in his studies, and that's not his trip in life, his brother-in-law, if I recall right, actually comes down and tells him, why are you suffering here? You need to move to the Gulf, which is pretty much the place where most of Keralites, or a lot of Kerala actually kind of moves to kind of access better economic opportunities. So Shahji, along with his brother-in-law, they move to the Gulf. And then the next few years are an absolute horror show. Horror show because the work is really super demanding, super torturous, one may argue. I'm sure they kind of stayed in small dormitories, they worked 18, 19 hours a day. It's a taxing life. And slowly through the 6 years, their life starts to change just a little bit, and so on and so forth, till finally they gather the monies to come back home for the first time. And the story of Shahji's first coming back home, the first time he comes back home, or his first homecoming, is a very powerful one, because he lands in Trivandrum, which is the airport that he accesses to go to his house. And he virtually gets out of the airport and he starts to look out for people who he can recognize or who can recognize him, because he's desperate to tell his story. He's not the same Shahji who left Trivandrum many years back. He has changed. He has become better off. He's starting to do well. He's no longer going to be the subject of barbs of his neighbors and so on and so forth. So he's virtually at the airport. Instead of rushing back home, he's starting to look out for people who he can recognize and then strike a conversation and tell the story of how he's starting to do well. This is no different from, for example, what many of our parents, surely my father, would have done the first time he moved back from a city back to his village after kind of settling down the city. So my father actually came from a small town in the southern part of India, from a state called Tamil Nadu. And through a journey, he reaches Bangalore. He migrates to Bangalore. He gets work in a public sector firm in Bangalore. And the first time he goes back home, it's a very proud moment for him, because he left his village just about finishing his 10th standard. He goes to Madurai. He does some course in the Industrial Training Institute, tries to acquire some skills, partially hangs around there for a while, works in a theater somewhere in between as a person who runs the projector, a projector operator, if you can call them that. He eventually makes it to Bangalore, where he starts to work in a public sector, and I can imagine very well the first time he might have gone home after he starts to do well in Bangalore, in the city. His heart would have been swelling with pride at having made it in the city. What he might have been wearing at that point in time would have changed, as against what he was wearing when he left his village. The things that he would have bought would have changed. He might have been most likely wearing a watch, carrying a suitcase instead of the jola, the cloth bag that he would have left his village with, and so on. No different to what Shahji would have felt when he came back to Trivandrum for the first time. For around 2 weeks, Shahji goes around from home to home, relatives, friends and family, telling the story of how he's starting to do well, because telling that story or narrating it out actually starts to make him feel powerful from within. 2 weeks later, Shahji kind of goes back to the Gulf. Of course, he's not too happy going back, but he goes back to the Gulf, in this case Saudi, and starts his grind all over again to have a better life. 16 years later, Shahji's built a restaurant or bought a restaurant or something like that. He sells it, makes a ton of money, and he travels back to Trivandrum for good. The first thing that he does, among other things, when he comes back to Trivandrum, is to demolish his old home, which was a home that just about he was able to make ends meet along with his parents. And he builds this humongous 2-storied home filled with all the opulent stuff that I just talked about at the start of this story. And he paints it with this flaming orange called the sunrise orange. At some point in time, he settles down in the conversation after he's had this emotional outpouring. He looks around and he tells, you see all those cars, they all belong to me. This entire plantation that you see in front all belongs to me, the rubber plantations. I made a lot of money. All I know is that it just takes one fever or one round of illness and all of this could get wiped out. But this is my time under the sun. I meet his father, another absolute thorough gentleman. He makes coffee for us and we have a small chat with him. And it's beautiful. 2 hours later, Dilip and I get into the same car. We bid goodbyes to Shahji and his father, and we the car goes down to the cul-de-sac, takes a right again this time, and we look back at the house, and the house looks beautiful. The condescension is gone, and it's a very powerful experience for me. And this story, from among other stories, like I mentioned at the start, set into motion what we were to call as human-centered strategy in the coming years. Because when you step back and look at the story, virtually every single vector of strategy development is hidden in the story. You have a great idea of who the consumer is, or his life is about, what his dreams, desires, hopes, fears, anxieties and aspirations are, how he relates to his home, of which we knew a lot because it's a 2.5 hour conversation, how he relates to his decor, how he relates to color, what can motivate him, how does a brand have a relationship with him, if you had to set up a retail setting, what kind of retail setting would he feel the most comfortable in, if you had to make decor booklets, what kind of decor would he most relate to, and so on and so forth. So this story held in its womb pretty much every single vector of strategy. And we're thinking what a beautiful thing to have as a job, as a work, because all we need to do is to travel around the country, meet different people, walk into their homes or into their settings, find the stories, relate to it personally, get emotionally displaced ourselves, and then use that to kind of craft out brilliant narratives for a brand or an organization. The ending to the story, however, is not just this, that this became the foundation of our human-centered strategy and thinking. The ending to the story was that many years later, I was doing a symposium. I was conducting a symposium on human-centered strategy along with the vice provost of Sawdust School at the Yale School of Management. This symposium happened at the Yale School of Management. And I was searching for some visual references for the kind of homes that Shahji had. And I came to know that Vincent Leroux, if that's how you pronounce his name, a French photographer, had come to India, maybe in the 70s or so, I'm not exactly sure of the date, to a quaint town called Tiruvannamalai, which is 250 kilometers shy of Bangalore. And he saw these bizarrely colorful homes with weird looking geometric shapes, rhomboids, squares, ellipses, circles, all kind of created on the front elevation. And he took pictures of it, photographs of it. Around the same time, or maybe later, Ettore Sottsass, arguably one of the best designers that we may know of, he traveled to the same town and he was so inspired by these homes and the way they looked. And these homes are not done by architects or interior designers. They are done by the local contractors or the masons along with the ideas of the homeowners. He was so inspired by them that he launched a range of luxury Italian furniture, it is said, inspired by the homes of Tiruvannamalai. So there is magic actually in relating to human beings in their lives, acknowledging their uniqueness, celebrating it, and drawing inspirations from it. As it is true for a chair or a lounge sofa, so is it true for brands. And that's a learning that we take to our hearts even today. If you do like this story, please do follow us, like us, and subscribe to us for many more of such stories. It would be great to have you on this journey along with us.